Buenos días a todos. Muchas gracias por venir, tanto los que estáis aquí presencialmente como los que estáis en la nube. Y la charla del seminario de hoy pues la van a dar dos colegas de Tech for Agro, Ben y Vicente, cuyo título, pues como aquí veis, es From Roots to Landscape. Coupling bio-geophysics with remote sensing to better understand vegetation water stress in agro-ecosystems. Una pequeña presentación de Ben y Vicente. Bueno, Ben o Benjamin. Bueno, si no queremos profanar el idioma de Molière, le podemos llamar Ben a secas. Eh, es un contratado doctor en el grupo Teforagro, es licenciado en física por la Universidad de Versailles, en Saint-Quentin. Muy bien, muy bien, muy bien. Mis 9 meses en Montpellier sirvieron para algo. Hizo también un máster en geofísica aplicada a la Universidad Pierre y Marie Curie de París. Y finalmente hizo su doctorado en geofísica en el IUSTEA en Aix-en-Provence. Después de hacer el doctorado, obtuvo una Marie Curie postdoctoral fellowship a caballo entre la Universidad de Padova y el Berkeley Lab de Estados Unidos. Y bueno, en T4 Agro, pues digamos que su línea de investigación es el uso de geofísica, que es lo que nos va a contar él un poco, que es la geofísica, y también combinando datos de teledetección para entender mejor los flujos de agua en el continuo suelo, vegetación y atmósfera. Y luego tenemos a Vicente Burchard, que, bueno, Vicente es canadiense, de padres chilenos, aunque algunos pensarían que es de padre italiano, pero... Vicente es también postdoc, es Juan de la Cierva, en el grupo T4Agro, y es licenciado en Geografía Física por la Universidad McGill en Canadá. Y luego ya se mudó a Bélgica para hacer un máster en hidrología en la Universidad Católica de Lovaina. Y luego, pues, vino para España a hacer el doctorado con una ITN Marie Curie en el SPEC Lab, en el CCHS del CSIC, afiliado a la Universidad de Alcalá, donde tuve el honor de codirigirle, sobre la mejora de modelos de evapotranspiración usando teledetección en ecosistemas estructuralmente complejos como son las dehesas. Y su línea, bueno, también mencionar que Vicente, pues desgraciadamente nos abandonará en el futuro porque afortunadamente ha conseguido una plaza de científico titular en el SPEC Lab. Pero bueno, como colaboramos con el grupo de Pilar Martín, pues es un hasta luego. Y bueno, su línea de investigación pues es el modelado de evapotranspiración a distintas escalas, tanto para hacer una contabilidad del riego como para el seguimiento de la sequía y también lograr una mejor comprensión de la diversidad funcional en los ecosistemas. Así que nada, yo dejo de hablar y os cedo la palabra. Empieza Ben, que es el que trabaja con las raíces.
Exactamente. Entonces, dudaba hacerlo como en español, pero creo que voy a cambiar a inglés. Aunque, bueno, mi español mejora con los meses, los años, pero todavía estoy más confidente en inglés, si me permitéis. Pero preguntas en español, bien, sin problema. Entonces, sí, me toca empezar porque yo, como ha dicho Héctor, tengo un perfil de... no más, a ver, sigo en español. Bueno, okay, I'm working with geophysics. So what is geophysics is about like imaging the soil, right? And well, this is a bit the path that we follow when we do geophysics. We start from field measurements, which are non-intrusive measurements. We collect raw data, so putting sensors all over the surface of interest. And after processing the data, we want to build a subsurface model. So a model that reflects different heterogeneities in our soil. And the good thing is that you can apply it spatially and timely, and you can collect three-dimensional data and time data to monitor the system. So my research line is like I'm trying to connect what we call the SPAC, so the soil plant atmosphere continuum. And because in this continuum, we can observe like different processes, but I'm interested in the processes related to the movement of water. So the water moves mainly because of the evaporation and also the transpiration within the soil. And we have like these different movements within the soil, but it's not only directed toward the atmosphere, but we also have redistribution into the soil. So, and the main limitation up to now is to have like an indication of well, where are our roots, because they are not, we cannot see it, they are hidden. So my research is trying to connect this root system with the other component of this path. And since like I started my PhD, I think this community of agro-geophysics was relatively small. It's not super common methods, particularly in Spain. I think it's underrepresented up to now. But we start to build a consortium, and we start to raise awareness about like the use of geophysics for agronomy, because geophysics traditionally was more for mining industries. So it doesn't, like, we move the shift from mining, from resources to agronomy, hydrology, and it's very an interesting impetus to consider. So we published this paper like a couple of years ago, and well, I think it's a starting point if you're interested on the use of geophysics for agronomy. So my work is distributed over like different ecosystem, I would say. So we study grape wine, we study orchards, trees, but we also study like herbaceous plants. And you see here, well, you see like first cables, because in geophysics we use cables, we use sensors. I'm going to describe a bit more, but you also see different landscape, right? So we have like irrigated grapevine, but here we have like a trees that survive into the desert in Israel. And we were with colleagues wondering where the water come from, because this tree was transpiring, but there was no water coming like from the rain. So interesting question for geophysicists. Okay. And then geophysics can be applied also at different scales. So from the small scale, we call it a rhizotron here. So we can see the development of the roots through the rhizotron. And we collect like very accurate data to answer an hypothesis. Then once we understand the processes at the lab, we can export it and create like what we call mesoscale experiments, with also like collecting a lot of parameters and controlling the parameters. So controlling the rain, controlling the different soil properties. And then once we understand, we never fully understand, but we go to the field and we measure to the field, and we collect data on like larger scale field. So usually like we want to really understand the processes associated with this root zone. And so we want to open what we call the black box, because a lot of models rely on assumption up to now. So if we can observe, if we can afford like ground truth to this complete system, then it will be really interesting. So first, using geophysics, we want to get some signature. Like the first thing is like, okay, I'm going to measure a signal, but where does this signal come from? So basically, when we are working with vegetation, the first thing that we observe is that the plant is the seat of natural activity. So the plant, due to the fluxes of sap, due to the fluxes of water, produce natural signal that we can measure. So basically here, the sap flow here the sap flow, daily sap flow, is connected to the electrical potential. So if we put one sensor and we measure the electrical potential in the stem, we see that there is a correlation between the plant's flow and the electrical flow. So that's a first signature. And then, of course, we can measure on the soil, and we can measure on the stem. and we can measure then the evapotranspiration to connect everything. So that will be the connection with what we are doing here. So I'm going to present two examples. The first will be like a laboratory experiment to study the root response using geophysics to partial root zone drying. So partial root zone drying is a method for efficient irrigation. And the second example will be the use of geophysics to study the impact of land use and land cover change on the water budget, and a case study in a dehesa in Extremadura. So first example, so we applied partial root zone drying. So I think I have a public here that knows better than me how it works. So we apply irrigation on one side of the root system, and the other side like felt that the roots are dehydrated. So it is going to send a water stress signal, and it's going to produce the AB signal, right? Well, I'm not going to enter into detail because otherwise you will question me, and that's not my topic. So I'm keeping it simple for at the moment. And then, so have you seen the picture like before? Here we apply this for this laboratory experiment, and we measure from time to time. And so we wet one side of the root system, we dry the other side, and then we wet the other side, and alternatively we stress the root on that one side and we stress the root on the other side. And what we want to see is like to measure like the root activity during the stress to see if the root is able to uptake the water from where and how it is uptaking the water. So do the roots stress? Is there like hydraulic redistribution between the stress part of the root system? How does it affect the full like uptake of the water? How water moves during the partial root zone drying? Because usually when you apply this, we never know how the root functioning during this experiment. So we applied the same. This is the exact same idea that when we go for an encephalogram for medicine. So we put electrodes and we want to try to measure the signal of the root system. So the best analogy of this experiment is just this encephalogram, right? And we want to understand from a sequence of measurements. Okay, that I'm going to show you. Sorry. Okay. Here. So the strength of geophysics is that you can cover like the full spatial area moving the sensor. So you have a lot of sensors and you combine all different measurements to get information spatially. So here, this is my sequence of measurements, and I'm measuring the signal at different location on my rhizotron, and I'm injecting current here. So this is one way to measure. And this is what we get in terms of like how water moves. So the scale here is the electrical resistivity. So it means that blue means more water and red means less water. So just after the irrigation, here we irrigate on the left side of the rhizotron. You see that it's mostly wet on that side, and there are like very few effect of root water uptake just after the irrigation. Now, what we want to see is like, okay, that side of the rhizotron, you have roots, but they are like stressed, right? Do the roots uptake the water still on that side of the box, even if they don't have access to water? And the response that we observe is that yes, so the roots mainly uptake the water here because it's a red, so less water, okay? But we also have like also kind of connection here. So so even if the root system was stressed here, there is like water redistribution from left to right, and you can see a root water uptake effect on that side too. Good thing also on using geophysics is that you can combine observation with modeling. So again, another here. So here we model the effect of the root water uptake on the rhizotron, and you see the left and right effect. So the stress applied after 3 hours, the plant was uptaking here, and then the plant was uptaking on that side. So this allows us to make projection on how much water the plant can access after 20 hours, after 30 hours, after 40 and a day, and even longer period with uncertainties. Okay, so that would be the soil moisture in our soil with time. Okay, so that's a modeling exercise just to show you that we can observe, but we can also model the processes. Oops, sorry. Then the second example. So this is an example in a DESA. So very large scale in that case, and we applied the same methods, but at a larger scale. First, we started from a conceptual model. So we know that in that DESA there is 3 treatments with different nitrogen inputs, and we want to see if we are able to see the different water regime, how it changes from the different treatments in terms of soil. Oops. So we made the hypothesis that a lot of water is kept into this clay layer here, but we don't know how much the trees can uptake this water and can contribute to the competition with the grass. So that was our motivation to apply geophysics here. And we obtained those maps. So the same color type than the one I described before. So more or less to make it simple, the blue is wet, and yellow is more dry soil. And this is different depths, okay? So mainly if like the 3 towers are here, the three treatments are different here, and you see clearly differences in the water accessible for the trees between the treatments. Then there is a depth effect, but mostly the heterogeneities is due to there are like channels, like the roads and everything. So there are also effects of soil compaction, not only effect due to vegetation. And to finish, so we want to connect all the measurements. So the soil measurements we know that they are linked with the transpiration measurements. And I mean, there are papers now connecting this. So in that axis, it's the resistivity, the measure I show you that we can obtain from the geophysics. And in that axis, there are like the pressure, the leaf water potential. And there are correlation between what we measure into the soil and what we measure in terms of fluxes into the tree. And I mean, there are some authors that already made the exercise to use this soil information to refine the model of evapotranspiration. And even if we start from a very, very basic model that developed the FAO model, and that Vicente is going to criticize later, we can see that it helps to evaluate the transpiration of the tree, and it's a good calibration for that. So yeah, from that point, I'll let you do.
Thanks, Ben. So yeah, Ben was really looking at it at like below the surface, and now we're gonna go. I'll be talking more above the surface or looking from objects at a distance. So we're working a lot with remote sensing. So remote sensing, for those who don't know, is essentially like obtain information from different objects, surfaces, or ecosystems from a distance using sensors that are in different platforms. Could be on a drone, could be on a plane, or a satellite. So for example, the human eye is the natural remote sensing system because we see an object, we interpret it, we're receiving a signal from it, and we interpret that object. So what we use is sensors that also not only capture what's visible, but also things that are invisible to the human eye. So for example, the spectral regions on the infrared or thermal regions, and this allows us to get much more information of the the object compared to, for example, what we can see with the human eye. And so we're working mostly on two different regions. So, for example, the shortwave visible near infrared region. So this is from 0.43 micrometers. And in this area, it's giving us information on how, if we're talking about plants or vegetation, how plants absorb, transmit, and reflect the solar radiation. And the way that plants will interact with light depends mostly on the characteristics of vegetation, their structure, the composition of chlorophylls, water content. So using these sort of spectral traits, we can understand better the functional traits of the vegetation. So, for example, here you can see a typical leaf spectra, and we see that there's the leaf is absorbing much more in the blue and the red. This is where the chlorophyll is absorbing the light, and it's reflecting the green area. So that's why we see plants as green. And then there's other different spectral features like water absorption features that we can use to understand better vegetation. Here, for example, we have a spectra of a vegetation with different levels of biomass, and we can see that vegetation, the different levels of biomass is really changing how much reflectance there is in the near infrared area. No? So using these spectral information, we can deduce information on the condition and traits of the vegetation. In terms of thermal infrared, in this case, there's a relation between long wave radiation and the surface temperature. So basically using the Stephen-Boltzmann's law, and using temperature, it's not really focused on traits mapping, but more on understanding the physiology of the plant. So temperature of the canopy is related more to transpiration and photosynthesis. For example, water limitation will induce a partial stomatic closure vegetation. This will decrease the amount of water evaporated through transpiration from the plant. And this reduces the cooling effect, because transpiration is a cooling effect because the process of evaporation uses energy, and this uses the energy which cools the plant. Same thing as with humans in the summer. When we're sweating, this is a cooling effect where the process of evaporation will use up energy and will cool the skin. So if the stomata are closing and there's less transpiration, then the plant will increase in temperature, and therefore we can really see a kind of a link between temperature, stomatal conductance, and transpiration. And so with remote sensing, we cannot directly measure ET or evapotranspiration or transpiration, but there's different models that we can indirectly estimate it. And one of the main models is like the surface energy balance modeling. And essentially, the surface energy balance is where the available energy at the surface, which is dictated by, for example, albedo or the characteristics of the vegetation, is redistributed in two main fluxes: evapotranspiration, latent heat flux. So this is the energy that's used to transform liquid water into vapor, and then sensible heat flux, which is the energy used to change the temperature of a surface. For example, to estimate sensible heat flux, we can use the temperature of the surface, the difference between the atmosphere, and then a sort of resistance term, which is related to how easy it is for the flux to go from the surface to the atmosphere. So, for example, if there's more wind or more turbulence, like depicted from this piece from Van Gogh, Starry Nights, it's easier for water to flow from the surface to the atmosphere. And so there's different kinds of surface energy balance models. There's kind of, let's say, one source, big leap models. For example, the one mentioned by Ben is the ET for foul, which is probably the most widely used. But then we concentrate more on different energy balance models that separate the energy balance between different sources, for example, vegetation and soil. Why are we interested in evapotranspiration? Well, ET is kind of, it links the whole biogeochemical cycling into links between water cycle, energy balance, of course, and also carbon cycling through the link between transpiration and photosynthesis. But it is a highly dynamic process, which is influenced by how much energy is available at the surface, the soil moisture, the turbulence, the stomata regulation, or the physiology of the plant. Which makes remote sensing one of the only ways that can be used to monitor evapotranspiration in both time and space. Yes. So the model we've been using for the well, in my case since my PhD, but Actos has been using it for many years. Is a model as two-source energy balance model. It was developed by Norman et al. In 1995. And it's basically using the main inputs as I described in the beginning. So thermal data, the land surface temperature, as a main boundary condition, and then different plant traits that we are retrieving from the shortwave, visible and near infrared reflectance, and of course meteorological data like shortwave radiation and temperature. And the interesting thing about this model is that one, it separates the energy balance between a vegetation canopy and the soil. Therefore, we can get an estimate of transpiration and soil evaporation. And it's also a fairly simple model, while being not too sorry, it's a fairly simple model, but it's still based on physics and physically based. So we're able to apply to different scales, in situ level with drones, up to satellite. And so if you like to see more information of the model, there's the Python code developed and kept by Hector from Tech for Agro, and also there's a recent paper that kind of shows the brief history of this model. But what happens when we go to quite more complex agro-ecosystems? For example, the dehesa, like Ben introduced, or savanna ecosystems, which have a kind of a tree overstory and then an understory of grass. Which there's essentially two different vegetation layers that are in the ecosystem. And of course, for example, like vineyards or other orchards, which have the crop, but also the interrow has maybe a cover crop, which is also affecting the transpiration, right? So what happens since the TSEP only assumes two layers? How do we parameterize the vegetation layer when there's two different vegetation components in the ecosystem? And especially when these vegetation components have different structure, different phenology, and it will interact with the atmosphere in a different way. So the simple answer is, well, let's add a source to the model. So during my PhD, we proposed the three-source energy balance model. And this way, we decouple the energy balance between two vegetation layers and then the soil layer. And so in this case, we applied the model in different savanna or what we call tree grass ecosystems. Both with sensors on towers to get like the full temporal period and to really validate the model, and also as applied a satellite scale to see if we're also able to use satellite-based data to capture kind of regional scale evapotranspiration. So we showed that the 3-step model improves over TSEP in these regions where here are highlighted the regions of that are savannas or classified as open forests. But not only do we improve the way evapotranspiration is modeled, but we're able to decouple the fluxes between these different sources. So we can get an idea of how different layers are transpiring throughout the year. So for example, this is the study site in Edesa that Ben showed, and it's Majadas. We can see that in blue, the grass it has a peak during the spring period, and then largely decreases during the summer, where it's senesces and there's no transpiration. But the trees, which are evergreen species, are relatively constant throughout the year. And this other site in the US, in California, which is a similar ecosystem, but the trees are deciduous. So we see that there's a bit more variability in the tree transpiration compared to an evergreen system. And this also allows us to better understand these ecosystems because, for example, if we compare the partitioning, the percentage of transpiration compared to total evapotranspiration, if we compare to seasonal rainfall, we see no relationship. But if we decouple between the trees and the grass, the transpiration, we see that actually there's a significant relationship and they're opposite. For example, the grass are positively related to seasonal water. They have smaller roots and they need soil moisture in the root zone. So they're dependent on this seasonal water inflow, while trees have longer or deeper roots, and actually as a percentage they transpire more during the summer when the grasses are not active, and so they dominate the transpiration during the summer period when there's less rainfall. And also we can apply this model in vineyard ecosystems or agronomic applications because the structure of these tree crops are very similar to savanna ecosystems, especially in cases where there's a cover crop. And so here we did a study with colleagues from the US and California, where they're interested to understand what is the water use from the cover crop, especially in this current debate where cover crops provide ecosystem services such as carbon sequestration, improve the soil conditions, but they're using potentially more water compared to conditions when there's no cover crop. So since the model can separate between the different sources, we applied it in 2 blocks where there was no cover crop, and then 2 other blocks where there was a cover crop. And we see that actually in purple is the total water use from, let's say, the interrow, and it doesn't change. The water use is actually quite similar between these 2 conditions, where the cover crop increased transpiration of the cover crop, of course, but it decreased the soil evaporation, the water loss from soil evaporation. So there was a kind of compensation effect where the blocks without cover crop had much more soil evaporation. So this is of course only model results, and now we're working on different sites to really validate this partitioning and see more directly how this cover crop affects the water use in these types of tree crops ecosystems. Another application that we can use for these types of evapotranspiration modeling is to detect droughts. So now we are involved in a project. It's an EU Africa project from the European Space Agency. We're developing a kind of a drought indicator for these rangelands in southern Ethiopia. So these are areas that are extremely drought prone, and also their main activity is pastoralism. So they're very dependent on rainfall for biomass of the grass and for food of their cattle. And so we are using our evapotranspiration models to improve kind of an early warning detection and to develop an open source tool to use these satellite-based indicators. Oh no, and yeah, so this is basically some preliminary results where we're using data from the European Space Agency to estimate evapotranspiration and combine it with different data sets, for example, precipitation or other meteorological data. And we can develop a crop composite drought index where we kind of detect if there's drought or not. So, for example, this is in 2021, which was a very important drought in this region, and we see that almost in every month there's kind of a deficit of water and high and very severe droughts. So now in the construction, we're building a kind of a notebook that will allow to apply this index and to implement the index in this region and open source tools that anybody can use it and apply in this region. So just in summary, that remote sensing is kind of a powerful tool to better understand these agro-ecosystems at different scales, whether from leaf, in situ, or using satellite data. By combining different sensors, in this case, shortwave and long wave thermal data, and we incorporate them into model approaches, we can better understand like water stress and the condition of vegetation. And the fact that the vegetation has a very important role in modulating water and heat fluxes, and that models need to incorporate this structure in order to be able to accurately model ET. So, for example, big leaf models like the FAO model, they're very much used because they're very practical, but because they're practical doesn't mean that they're accurate. So we're trying to implement a paradigm shift in this area. And then some applications of ET models is that we can detect water stress and vegetation. We can improve the water management in agronomic situations for better irrigation management, better understand ecosystems, especially in my case, for more complex ecosystems and they're related in relation with the bio-geochemical cycling, and apply for drought detection and monitoring. And I think that's all. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias a Ben y a Vicente. Y no sé si la audiencia tenéis alguna pregunta o cuestión o alguna duda.
Bueno, sí, hace falta para los que están en el Zoom. Bueno, en español o en inglés, como.
Como quiera, sí. Oh,
Venga, en español, vale.
compañera.
Sí, bueno, es para Vicente, de hecho, para la parte de Vicente. Nada, muchas gracias por la presentación, que además está muy bien que la hayáis dividido en dos y cada uno haya contado su parte de lo más local a lo más global, está muy interesante. Y tenía una pregunta para Vicente sobre lo de los spectral traits. Creo que, no sé, lo has comentado en la introducción, sé que no ha sido como la parte central de tu charla, pero bueno, estaba curioso con esta parte. O sea, los rasgos funcionales de las plantas pues, han cogido mucha relevancia desde hace muchos años, ¿no? Porque nos ayudan mucho a predecir pues, los efectos de cambios ambientales y porque son buenos indicadores también de procesos ecológicos, en pipí, carbono en el suelo, ¿no? Entonces, quería preguntaros vuestra opinión sobre cómo de fiables son estas spectral traits desde remote sensing, si funcionan solo en ecosistemas muy monodominantes y también son útiles en comunidades multiespecíficas, a qué escala espacial, en fin, porque yo he visto, hace años empecé a ver algunos trabajos, ¿no? Relacionando pues medidas de remote sensing de diversidad funcional, con MPP, otras cosas, pero tampoco he visto un boom de esto que y el uso potencial sería muy interesante, ¿no? Porque todas estas medidas son muy complicadas y muy costosas de conseguir en campo a distintas escalas espaciotemporales y tampoco he visto un boom de artículos sobre esto. No sé si es que hay muchos problemas. ¿Cuál es vuestra?
Vale. Sí, realmente el boom está empezando ahora porque ahora en el mundo de televisión están bastante interesados en el tema de diversidad, que antes no se tocaba mucho, pero yo creo que en los últimos 5 años sí que hay un tipo de boom. Y yo también ahora, desde hace 3 años, que también he empezado en esa área de mejor entender cómo se puede usar estos spectral traits, pero aplicarlo a diversidad, donde muchas veces hay un problema de escala, ¿no? Entre las escalas ecológicas y la escala de televisión. Entonces nosotros trabajamos con distintos sensores que pueden tener diferentes tamaños de píxel, pero ¿cómo podemos traducir ese píxel a información que es relevante para los ecólogos o para la ecología de diversidad, ¿no? Entonces, ahora mismo hay como un tipo de un enfoque importante para mejorar esa relación entre lo que tenemos en televisión y lo que se ha trabajado tradicionalmente en ecología. Entonces, ¿cómo fiables son los traits? Depende, depende del ecosistema, depende de la fuente de datos que usa. Hay diferentes modelos, hay modelos más empíricos, hay modelos más basados en física. Entonces un poco depende, obviamente en un sistema que es más simple para caracterizar, normalmente es bastante fiable. Por ejemplo, en la dehesa, como he trabajado mucho, muchas veces es como el tamaño del píxel está mezclado entre el árbol y el pasto. Es difícil entender dónde viene la señal y cómo mezclar esa señal para mejor entender, por ejemplo, los rasgos funcionales de la cobertura herbácea. Entonces, depende, pero sí que ahora mismo yo encuentro que ahora de repente es un boom de más de diversidad y de selección porque hay muchos más artículos que están saliendo ahora y luego hay todo el programa de GeoBond que están muy enfocados en el uso de teledirección con diversidad.
¿Puedo añadir algo? Sé que la pregunta no es para mí, pero creo que la biodiversidad es en el suelo también, un porcentaje enorme de biodiversidad en el suelo. Y bueno, sabemos también que el remote sensing no penetra mucho en el suelo, ¿verdad? Entonces, bueno, la geofísica también no puede como ir hasta como investigar como largas áreas así, pero también se puede usar la geofísica para la biodiversidad en el suelo. También por la salud del suelo es muy útil. La compacción, la composición química del suelo, si hay contaminantes en el suelo, todo esto se puede medir también con geofísica. Y bueno, yo no he hecho nada de biodiversidad realmente en el suelo, pero me han dicho que hay muchísima biodiversidad en el suelo, entonces será interesante pasar este paso también con la geofísica, entonces lo hablaremos un día, creo.
Primero y luego televisión.
Bueno, yo he añadido también unas pequeñas pinceladas también. Bueno, tanto en teledetección como en geofísica, lo que al final realmente me digo, pues en detección es radiación electromagnética, en geofísica es conductividad eléctrica, y o sea, realmente no medimos estos parámetros biofísicos. O sea, al final lo que tenemos que hacer es, a través de modelos, bien empíricos o físicos, pues hacer una estimación. O sea, que al final siempre tenemos que lidiar con incertidumbres. Entonces, tiene sus ventajas, pero claro, y ahora se está poniendo más énfasis de dar no solo una información de, pues, este contenido de clorofila es X, sino que según mi modelo y según mis observaciones, pues tengo este rango de error porque es que me estoy equivocando. Igual que cuando me equivoco, cuando mido en la realidad, también me estoy equivocando con teledetección. Entonces tenemos que realmente lidiar con incertidumbres y dar un paso más allá y proporcionar información sobre incertidumbre. ¿Alguna cuestión o pregunta más? Yo tengo una pregunta para ambos. Bueno, habéis hablado un poco lo que habéis estado haciendo hasta ahora y pues podrías contarnos un poco cuáles son vuestros planes de futuro. Por ejemplo, pues tú, Vicente, cuando te incorpores al CCHS en tu plaza y tú, Ben, pues en el futuro aquí en Teforagro, que esperemos que sea muy largo.
Vale, ¿empiezo yo? Vale. Eh, pues en el futuro, lo que voy a hacer un poco relacionado con tu pregunta, Pablo, que ahora estamos en un proyecto que estamos tratando de mejorar relacionar diversidad con teledirección y también la diversidad con teledirección se ha enfocado mucho en traits, en functional traits, spectral traits, pero también como he trabajado mucho en aspiración, también quiero dar un paso más allá de entender la función del ecosistema. Entonces, usando tanto nuestro modelo para evapotranspiración, pero también los traits con plant traits, eh, entender un poco cómo la diversidad afecta el funcionamiento del ecosistema usando nuestros modelos de teledirección. Entonces, eso es una línea que me gustaría seguir y también al final que presenté el tema de monitorización de sequías y eso una línea un poco más de aplicación que es presente en zonas en África donde hay muchas sabanas y mucha dependencia de los rangelands, que aplicar estos modelos en estos sistemas para mejorar o mitigar los efectos de sequías, ¿no? Eso más o menos mi idea.
Para mí, bueno, ahora pienso irme de vacaciones más que otra cosa. Y luego, bueno, a largo plazo, bueno, aplicamos a proyectos ahora juntos y son varios proyectos. La verdad que he aprendido en un año, desde un año que estoy aquí, he aprendido mucho como en qué tipo de investigación se hace en España, porque vengo como de un postdoc de Italia, donde como el uso del agua no es un problema realmente. Entonces aquí en España mucho más que hacer que ahí en terminología del uso del agua en irrigación, pero también en los ecosistemas típicos de aquí. Eh, Así que, bueno, a ver si los proyectos que presentamos son como se admiten, ¿cómo se dice? Sí, exactamente. Pero creo que hay futuro para la geofísica aquí en España, sí.
Bueno, pues si no hay ninguna pregunta más ni comentario, pues agradeceros de nuevo la charla y a vosotros la asistencia y nos vemos para la próxima.